There is a place beyond the noise, beyond the lists, the deadlines, the apologies we keep rehearsing, beyond the late-night scrolling and the early morning ache, beyond the masks we wear so long we forget we're still underneath them. A quieter place, not far, but easy to forget. It lives in your breath, in the space between your thoughts, in the pause before you say, "I'm fine," when you're not. That place is where this journey begins. These are not stories meant to entertain. They are stories meant to unravel, to loosen what's been knotted too tight for too long, to remind your soul how to listen and how to be listened to. Each one is a lantern, lit slowly, carried by monks, healers, and wanderers through fog, wind, grief, and grace. Each one holds a lesson, not to fix you, but to walk beside you. This is not about answers, this is about presence. Not about getting somewhere, but returning to where you already are. So wherever you are now, lying awake, walking alone, washing dishes in silence, let these words enter like rain through a cracked window. You don't have to open the door wide. Just soften a little. Let stillness find you. Let story carry you. Let healing begin, not with effort, but with exhale. Now, come with me. We begin with the first story. The bamboo that bends. Story 1. The bamboo that bends. Soundscape. A distant waterfall, cicadas beneath a twilight sky. Bamboo leaves rustle in the wind. In the mountains of Kyushu, there was a small temple built on the slope of a hill so steep that the steps to Bai, it seemed to lead straight into the sky. It was a humble place, roofed with moss, and nestled among groves of bamboo that bowed gently in the wind. There lived an old Zen master named Kayan, whose eyes were like still water, reflecting, never grasping. People came from distant villages just to sit in silence with him. They did not always understand why, only that in his presence, their hearts softened and their minds slowed. One day, a young man arrived at the temple, breathless and restless. His name was Tetsuya. A rising star in the city, a trader sharp and ambitious, with silk robes and a heart wrapped tightly in knots. He had heard of Master Kayan from a woman he once loved, who had told him, "When you are tired of controlling everything, go meet the man who controls nothing." Tetsuya laughed at the memory. Still, something in him had cracked. He hadn't slept in weeks. Every deal, every conversation, every hour was curated like a chessboard. But somehow, he was losing. Life was slipping through his fingers like water through a clenched fist. When he arrived, the master didn't greet him with words, but simply handed him a broom. Tetsuya blinked. "I came for wisdom, not chores." Kayan only smiled. "Then begin by sweeping away your ideas of wisdom." Tetsuya stayed, not because he understood, but because he was too exhausted to argue. He swept the moss-laden paths, prepared tea, and sat in long silences that felt like lifetimes. Every time he tried to speak of his business, his regrets, his plans, Kayan would wave a hand and say, "Not now. Watch the bamboo." At first, Tetsuya resented it. "Why does he want me to waste time looking at plants?" he muttered. But one night, as the wind rose and the bamboo bowed in great green arcs under the weight of the storm, Kayan finally spoke. "You see how they move?" Tetsuya nodded. "They bend, and yet they do not break." There was a pause. Then Kayan turned to him. "You, Tetsuya, you are the oak, proud, rigid. When the storm comes, You will break, not because you are weak, but because you will not bend. Tetsuya looked at the grove. The wind roared again, and still, not one stalk of bamboo snapped, only swayed. How? He whispered. Kayan's voice was soft. Because they do not fight the wind. They yield to it. They let go of control. Philosophical reflection. In Buddhist teachings, there is the concept of anicca, impermanence. Nothing is fixed. Everything shifts. Our suffering arises not from the change itself, but from our resistance to it, from the stories we tell ourselves about how things should be. Control is an illusion the ego clings to for safety. But what is the cost of that illusion? Tension, fear, exhaustion, disconnection from life as it is. Master Kayan's bamboo was not just a plant. It was a teaching, a metaphor, a mirror. In Zen, the way is not found by force. The more we grip, the more we slip. The river doesn't argue with rocks. It flows around them. Psychological interpretation. From a psychological perspective, the need to control is often born from early experiences of unpredictability. We learn that safety means mastery, over emotions, over people, over outcomes. We strive, we strategize, we manage. But this constant hypervigilance keeps the nervous system in a state of fight or flight. Over time, the body begins to erode under the weight of constant preparedness. Tetsuya, like many of us, had become addicted to certainty. He needed results, predictability, guarantees. But life is not a business deal. When he came to the temple, he brought with him not just ambition, but a fear of letting go, a terror that if he did not control everything, he would collapse. But the paradox is this: only when he let go did he begin to heal. Resolution and integration. Weeks passed. Tetsuya stopped asking questions. He stopped trying to figure out the teachings. He began to sit, to sweep, to watch the bamboo without judgment. One morning, a storm came. This time, Tetsuya did not run to protect his belongings. He stood barefoot in the garden as the wind howled, and he whispered, "Let it be." The storm passed, as it always does. Kayan approached him. "You have learned the art of yielding." Tetsuya bowed deeply. Before he left the temple, Kayan gave him a single parting gift, a small flute carved from bamboo. "Play it," he said, "when the world becomes too loud." Tetsuya returned to the city. He still worked, still traded, but he was different. He no longer tried to bend the world to his will. He flowed with it. When things changed, he changed. When things crumbled, he grieved, then rebuilt. Like bamboo, he kept the flute on his desk. Sometimes, he'd play a single haunting note and remember the silence of the temple. Closing thought. The Buddha once said, "You only lose what you cling to." Tonight, before you sleep, ask yourself, where in your life are you trying to control too tightly? Breathe into that place. Gently, with compassion. Now imagine being like the bamboo, rooted but flexible, strong but soft, present not grasping. As you drift into rest, carry this mantra: I bend but do not break. I yield and find peace. Story 2. The bowl with a crack. Soundscape. Light rain tapping on ceramic tiles. A kettle whistles softly. In the distance, a crow calls once and falls silent. Long ago, in a village nestled between emerald rice fields and misty hills, there lived an old potter named Nobu. His hands were weathered, shaped by clay and fire. and his heart bore the gentle weight of many winters. Nobu's small pottery shop stood beside a slow-moving stream, where dragonflies hovered like little monks meditating. In the sun, travelers and monks would pass by and stop for tea, admiring the shelves lined with bowls. None quite the same, each carrying the trace of fire, breath, and imperfection. But Nobu had a secret. On a high shelf, hidden behind a worn curtain, lay a cracked tea bowl. It had once been his finest piece, a bowl he had moulded with deep reverence for a Zen master's ceremony. But when it emerged from the kiln, it bore a long, jagged crack, like a scar across its face. Ashamed, Nobu never sold it. He kept it hidden, thinking it a failure. Years passed. Nobu aged. The bowl remained. Then, one autumn evening, a stranger arrived. He wore a simple robe, the color of faded smoke. His head was shaved, and his eyes held the calmness of trees that had endured many storms. He introduced himself as Ryotan, a Zen monk from a distant monastery. "I've heard," the monk said softly, "that your bowls carry more soul than symmetry." Nobu chuckled. "That's just another way of saying they're flawed." The monk smiled. "Flawed or alive?" They drank tea together under the flickering glow of a lantern. Outside, leaves fell like golden thoughts. Ryotan's eyes wandered to the curtain. "What do you hide there, Potter?" Nobu hesitated. "Only a broken dream." The monk stood. "May I see it?" Reluctantly, Nobu brought down the bowl. The crack shimmered faintly in the lantern light. Ryotan held it with reverence, as if cradling a wounded bird. "This," he said, "is not broken. It is honest." The Zen allegory. In Japanese Zen tradition, there exists an art called kintsugi, the practice of mending broken pottery with lacquer mixed with gold. The crack is not hidden, but illuminated. The flaw is not a failure, but a story, a testament to resilience. The broken bowl becomes more beautiful, not less. Why? Because it has known both wholeness and loss, and carries both with dignity. Ryotan looked into the bowl. "This bowl is like us. We all carry fractures, from grief, shame, mistakes. But healing is not erasing the crack. It is filling it with gold." Nobu's eyes moistened. "I never thought to see it that way." Ryotan turned to him. "Because you judged the bowl with the mind, but you must look with the heart." Buddhist philosophy. The Buddha taught, there is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. A phrase echoed centuries later by poets and saints. The EC, doctrine of dukkha, the truth of suffering, reminds us that life is not flawless. It is not meant to be. We hurt, we fail, we fall. But each scar is a teacher. Zen does not seek perfection. It seeks presence, intimacy with what is, not what should be. And in that honesty, we find a different kind of beauty, the kind that does not depend on symmetry, but sincerity. Psychological reflection. In modern psychology, the pursuit of perfection is often a coping strategy, a shield. We strive to be flawless, not because we love excellence, but because we fear rejection. We fear that if we show our cracks, we will not be loved. But research shows that vulnerability is the birthplace of connection. People are not moved by our perfection. They are moved by our authenticity, our scars, our stories. Nobu, like so many of us, had hidden his wound in shame, but in doing so, he also hid his most human creation. Healing begins when we allow the hidden parts of ourselves to be seen, not fixed, not erased, but witnessed with compassion. Closure. Before leaving, Raitan did something unexpected. He mixed gold dust with sap from a pine tree, and under Nobu's guidance, he filled the crack of the bowl with a golden line, delicate, imperfect, radiant. When the lacquer dried, the bowl no longer looked broken. It looked reborn. Raitan placed it at the center of the shelf. Let this be the first piece people see. And it was. Pilgrims who entered the shop would pause before it. Many wept, not because the bowl was perfect, but because it reminded them they didn't have to be. Nobu no longer made bowls to impress. He made them to tell the truth. Each bowl after that bore a mark, a line, a story, not hidden, not apologized for, just as they were, evening reflection. The Buddha once asked, "Can you love yourself, even when the mirror shows your cracks?" Tonight, before sleep, take time to reflect. What part of yourself have you been hiding in the shadows? What cracked bowl have you told yourself is too shameful to be seen? Now, imagine holding it gently in your hands. Don't fix it, just witness it. Pour light into the crack, gold into the scar. Let it be part of your wholeness. Sleep not as someone perfect, but as someone present. Story 3. The Bell That Never Rang. Soundscape. Deep night silence. A faint breeze brushing against wind chimes. A temple bell. Silent. Waiting. In a high mountain temple shrouded by cedar trees and mist, there was a bell that had never rung. It hung above the meditation hall, bound by thick hemp ropes. Its bronze body had darkened with years of weather, yet it remained untouched, suspended in potential, heavy with silence. The monks called it Shinnon, the sound of the heart. No one knew why the bell had never been rung. Some whispered that it was cursed. Others believed it could only be struck when one had mastered the art of stillness. And then came Emmy. She was a novice, young, quick-footed, with eyes that never seemed to stop scanning. Anxiety followed her like a second shadow. She'd come to the temple on the advice of her therapist after suffering from relentless panic attacks. Doctors could find nothing wrong with her body, yet every morning she woke with a clenched chest and breath that wouldn't settle. "I feel like something terrible is about to happen," she'd whisper, even when nothing's wrong. Master Joryu, the abbot of the temple, simply nodded when she told him this. "You are not alone," he said. "Fear lives in many shapes, but it grows most when it is left unnamed." He gave her a simple task. Each morning before sunrise, he said, "Go sit beside the bell. Just sit. Do nothing else." Emmy frowned. "But what if the panic comes again?" Joryu looked up at the silent bell. "Then sit with it, like an old friend who forgot how to speak." At first, it was unbearable. The pre-dawn darkness stirred her thoughts into wild animals. Her heart thudded like a drum. The shadows seemed to lean closer. Her mind whispered, "Run. You're not safe. Something is wrong." But Master Joryu had told her not to fight, not to flee, just to sit. So she did, shaking, sweating, sitting. Each morning she returned. Some days were easier, others not. But she began to notice something. The fear always came, and the fear always passed. It didn't destroy her. It didn't define her. It simply moved through her, like a storm cloud drifting over the valley below. Weeks passed. One cold morning, the wind carried a howl through the trees. The bell creaked on its rope. Emmy flinched, heart racing, but then she heard something else. Her breath. Slow, steady, grounded. She was no longer gripping her knees. She was sitting straight, watching, breathing, not running. Joryu appeared beside her. You see, the bell never needed to ring. It taught you in its silence. Zen metaphor. In the Zen tradition, there is a phrase. The sound of the bell is not in the strike, but in the space before it. What this points to is the fertile silence, the place where awareness meets discomfort without reacting. Zen teaches not to extinguish anxiety, but to befriend it, to sit with it as a wave, not a wall. Anxiety is not the enemy. Our rejection of it is. Like the bell that never rang, the fear does not need to go away to lose its power. It only needs to be witnessed. Honestly, gently, Buddhist teaching. The Buddha spoke often of the 5 hindrances, one of which is restlessness and worry, uddhacca kukucca, a mind that cannot stay still, pulled by imaginary threats. To counter this, he taught sati, mindfulness, the courageous act of returning, again and again, to the breath, to the body, to now. Like a man who watches the waves but no longer tries to stop the sea. Anxiety arises when the mind travels into the future, writing stories that have not happened. Mindfulness brings us back into the unshakable now. Psychological reflection. Modern neuroscience confirms what ancient wisdom taught. The more we resist anxiety, the stronger it becomes. Avoidance reinforces fear. But exposure with compassion, the gentle act of being with what is uncomfortable, rewires the brain. Emmy's healing came not from escaping her panic, but from watching it, without judgment, sitting with it, breathing with it, making space for it, instead of waging war against it. In therapeutic terms, this is acceptance-based awareness, found in practices like ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, and somatic experiencing. But at its heart, it is simply courageous, presence, resolution. One morning, well after winter had passed, Emmy rose before the sun. She no longer feared the walk to the bell. The fear still came sometimes, twinges, tremors, but they no longer unravelled her. She sat with the bell, as always. This time, she placed her hand on the wooden striker. Joryu, watching from a distance, thought she might finally ring it, but she did not. She smiled instead, softly, silently, and whispered, "Not all silence needs to be broken." And in that moment, the wind moved through the trees like a whispered blessing. Emmy later left the temple. She returned to her life, not as someone cured, but as someone capable of standing still in a storm. She taught others, sat with them, held their hands through their fears, saying, "You don't need to make the fear go away. Just sit with it, like a bell waiting to ring." Sleep reflection. The Buddha once said, "Fear arises and fear passes. Only awareness remains." Before sleep tonight, close your eyes. Feel into your body. Where is the tension? Where is the fear? Don't try to fix it. Don't run. Just sit with it. Name it. Breathe through it. Like Emmy, like the bell. And when the silence comes, let it stay. You are not broken. You are not behind. You are learning the art of staying, the art of stillness, the art of healing. Story 4. The teacup left full. Soundscape. A quiet room, faint crackle of a fireplace, distant cicadas, the clink of a teacup being set down. In a village where the mountains meet the mist, there lived a tea master named Hana. Her tea house, silent leaves, sat at the edge of a cedar forest, where the morning fog lingered like forgotten dreams. People from all walks of life came. not for the tea itself, though it was exquisite, but for the stillness that bloomed around her. Hana spoke very little. She moved like water, precise and soft, with a gaze that seemed to understand everything and demand nothing. One afternoon, a guest arrived unlike any other, a scholar from the city, clothed in layered silk and cloaked in opinions. His name was Masaru, and his voice filled the room like a tide, eloquent, assertive, endless. "I've studied the Tao, the Dharma, and the Sutras," he announced as he entered. "I've read every commentary, every interpretation." Hana bowed, offered no words, and led him to the tea room. Masaru continued. "I've taught mindfulness for years. People call me the thinking flame. My students say I explain things better than most monks." Hana offered a small smile, as serene as morning dew. She began preparing the tea, slow and ceremonial. Masaru watched, impatient. "You must have something to say about the paradox of Zen non-duality, don't you?" Still no reply. She poured the tea into his cup. He talked on, faster now, quoting Lao Tzu, referencing Nagarjuna, weaving a tapestry of intellect. The tea rose, near the rim. Still he spoke, now about neuroscience, psychology, collective awakening. The tea overflowed. It spilled into the saucer, dripped onto the floor. Startled, Masaru stood. "Stop! The cup is full!" Hana looked up, calm and clear. Her voice came for the first time. "Yes, just like you." The story behind the silence. That day, Masaru did not receive answers. He received silence, presence, and a single wet saucer. But that night, as he walked under the moonlit pines, something shifted. He realized every conversation he'd had been about convincing, every answer a shield, every word an escape from the discomfort of not knowing. He had filled his days with responses, but what he lacked was space. He returned to Hana the next day. This time, he said nothing, and in that silence, the tea tasted like rain on stone, Zen parable and interpretation. This story is an echo of a classic Zen tale, a master pouring tea for a scholar until it overflows, symbolizing how we cannot receive when we are already full of ourselves. In Zen, knowing is not accumulation, it is emptiness. To see clearly, the saying goes, empty your cup. In a world addicted to reacting, commenting, defending, Zen offers something radical, the possibility of not responding, of simply being, watching, letting things pass without the ego's need to assert itself. Buddhist wisdom. The Buddha once taught about right speech, not just what is true, but what is timely, necessary, and kind. Silence, too, is a form of speech. Another teaching, noble silence, is the space where insight is born, not from external answers, but internal stillness. We are not here to win arguments, to impress, to always react. Sometimes, the greatest wisdom is restraint, the choice not to answer, the space between thoughts, psychological insight. Modern psychology affirms what Zen has long known. The brain is wired for reaction. Especially when triggered, our prefrontal cortex, our reasoning mind, gives way to automatic responses, defensiveness, projection, over-explaining. But mindfulness creates a pause, a breath, a wedge between stimulus and response. This is the space of power. In therapeutic work, we teach response flexibility, the capacity to feel something and not immediately act on it. Masaru had lived in reaction. Hana offered him a mirror. The teacup, overflowed not because she was careless, but because he needed to see his fullness. Only in emptiness can we receive resolution and transformation. Masaru began visiting the tea house weekly. He no longer quoted sutras, no longer performed knowledge. He watched the tea, he tasted it, he learned to listen, to the kettle, to the trees, to silence itself. And something strange happened. The less he spoke, the more he understood. He later wrote a book titled The Teacup Left Full. But in its introduction he wrote, "This book is not an answer. It is a pause, a silence you can sip." Night reflection. The Buddha said, "Speak only," when it improves upon the silence. Tonight, as you prepare for sleep, ask yourself, where in life do I respond too quickly? Where am I filling space out of fear, not presence? Now, imagine your thoughts like tea. Let the kettle cool. Let the silence settle. Not every comment must be made. Not every question needs an answer. Not every discomfort requires a response. Some cups are best left full. Breathe. Let silence be your teacher tonight. Story 5. The Leaf That Floated. Soundscape. A gentle stream murmurs under a bridge. Autumn leaves spiral slowly through the air. Somewhere, a temple bell rings in the distance. Once, then fades. There was a narrow river in the heart of the forest, winding like a ribbon of glass. In early autumn, when the maple trees began to let go of their leaves, the water became a mirror of red and gold. It was here that a boy named Kaito would sit each morning, watching the leaves fall and drift downstream. Kaito was 13, wide-eyed and quiet. He had lost his father in a car accident the previous spring. Since then, he had lived with his grandfather, a retired monk named Genjo, who taught him not through lectures, but by walking slowly and listening deeply. Every day, they would sit by the river. "Why do the leaves fall?" Kaito asked one morning. Genjo smiled. "Because they no longer need to hold on." Kaito thought about that, then asked the harder question, "Why do people have to die?" Genjo watched a single red leaf spin slowly through the air and land on the water. "I don't know," he said, softly, "but I know this. The river never asks the leaf why it let go. It simply carries it." Kaito was not satisfied. He missed his father terribly, the man who used to race him through rice paddies, who told him stories of fox spirits and samurai, who always had the answers. But now, no answers came. And that made Kaito restless, afraid. The world felt unpredictable, unsafe, like the river might swell at any moment and sweep him away. That evening, he asked his grandfather, "What if another accident happens? What if you die next? What if I get sick? What if everything changes again?" Genjo looked at him, not with certainty, but with presence. He handed Kaito a small wooden leaf carved from cedar. "Hold this," he said, "and tomorrow we will float it." The next morning, they returned to the river. The sky was overcast, the water darker now, but still moving with steady breath. Genjo knelt beside Kaito. "You asked me about the future," he said. What if? He placed the wooden leaf on the surface of the water. "Let's see where this goes." They watched. At first, the leaf spun in a circle. Then it drifted sideways. Then it was caught by a current, pulled gently, toward a bend in the river. Kaito leaned forward. "We don't know where it will go, do we?" "No," Genjo said. "We don't. But aren't you afraid it might get stuck?" Genjo chuckled. Sometimes it will. That's part of the journey too. Symbolism and Zen. The drifting leaf is one of Zen's oldest symbols. It represents the nature of life's uncertainty, its fluid, unpredictable flow. In the teachings of Mahayana Buddhism, we are encouraged to embrace the truth of sunyata, emptiness, not as nothingness, but as openness, possibility, the absence of fixed identity, of fixed outcome. Zen reminds us, the leaf does not fight the wind, the river does not know its end. To be at peace, said Master Dogen, is to be at home in the unknown. Buddhist teaching. In the Four Noble Truths, the second truth speaks of the origin of suffering. Tanha, or craving, especially the craving for certainty, permanence, control. We suffer not just because things are painful, but because we cannot guarantee how long they will last. The Buddha's antidote was not blind faith, but mindful surrender. He taught that by observing the nature of reality, its impermanence, its unpredictability, we can begin to soften, to live in the moment rather than in fear of the next one. Psychological insight. Modern psychology calls this intolerance of uncertainty. It's a root cause of anxiety disorders. When the brain cannot predict, it panics. It fills in blanks. With worst-case scenarios, it tightens its grip. But practices like mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, MBCT, and acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, train us to sit with that discomfort, to feel it without acting on it. Kaito's questions were natural, human, but no answer could protect him from change. What could protect him was the ability to stay present, even when answers weren't available. That is true resilience. Transformation. Weeks passed. Kaito returned often to the river with his carved leaf. Sometimes it floated. Sometimes it sank. Once it got caught in the reeds for days before being released. And each time he watched. One evening he told Genjo, "I still don't know what will happen." Genjo nodded. "But I don't need to know." Genjo smiled. "You're becoming." The river. Evening reflection. The Buddha once said, "Do not dwell in the past. Do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment. Before you sleep tonight, ask yourself, what are you trying to predict? What are you afraid will happen?" Now, close your eyes. Breathe. Imagine a leaf resting on water. Let it drift. Let the river guide it. You are not required to know. You are only invited to trust the flow. Let that be enough for tonight. Story 6. The Monk Who Never Spoke. Soundscape. A hushed cloister. Wind threading through narrow halls. The soft rustle of robes. A distant bird calls once. Then silence. In the northern hills, where fog lingered like memory and the snow fell, without hurry there stood a monastery known as Shosein, the Garden of Quiet Pine. It was unlike most temples. There were no scheduled chants, no sermons, no bells to break the stillness. The monks there took a unique vow, a vow of deep listening. For 1 year, none would speak unless words were truly needed. Among them was an old monk named Jikan, whose name meant compassion through stillness. He had lived at Shosein for over 30 years, and during that time, many believed he had not uttered more than 100 words. He was known as the monk who never spoke. But when he looked at you, you felt as if every unspoken wound within you was heard. One winter morning, a woman arrived at the temple gates. Her name was Aiko. She was not seeking enlightenment, only a place to fall apart. Her eyes were red from weeping. Her body carried the language of despair, shoulders curved inward, steps reluctant, breath thin. The gatekeeper monk offered her tea and pointed her to the meditation garden, where Jikun tended moss. She sat on a cold stone bench, arms wrapped around herself, and for the first time in weeks said nothing. Jikun knelt nearby, trimming a patch of overgrown green. He did not ask why she was crying. He did not offer advice. He did not say, "Be strong." He simply stayed. The silence was so complete it began to soften the noise inside her. After some time, he poured tea into a small stone cup and set it beside her. Then, without a glance, returned to his work. Aiko wept harder, not from pain, but from relief. No one was trying to fix her. No one was offering solutions. And yet, she felt more seen than ever before. The essence of the silence. The days passed. Aiko returned each morning. Sometimes she sat. Sometimes she walked. Sometimes she raged quietly, tears falling into her sleeves. Jikun never asked what had happened, but he always made space beside him. And in that space, something began to shift. Zen understanding. Zen does not rush to heal. It does not move to interrupt sorrow with forced light. In fact, in many Zen monasteries, a student may sit in front of the master for years before a single question is asked. Why? Because true understanding arises not from answers, but from presence. Silence is the language of God, said Rumi. Everything else is poor translation. Jikan's silence was not passive. It was a sacred container, a listening so deep. It reached places words could not. Buddhist wisdom. The Buddha taught the practice of karuna, compassion, not as pity, not as fixing, but as the willingness to be with suffering without turning away, to sit with someone's grief without needing to transform it. He said, just as a mother protects her only child, let one cultivate an unbounded mind toward all beings. Sometimes the most powerful form of protection is not to speak, but to witness. Psychological reflection. In modern therapeutic language, Jikun practiced what we call attuned presence, being fully with another without trying to solve their pain. Studies in trauma therapy show that healing begins not when someone gives advice, but when someone stays, calm, grounded, empathetic. So many of us, when we see a loved one suffer, try to fix it. Don't cry. It's going to be okay. Think positive. But these phrases, though well meant, often isolate the one in pain. They imply that the pain is wrong, that the person is broken. What Aiko received from Jikun was something rare, non-judgmental presence. And in that presence, her nervous system began to rest. The transformation. One morning, after many days, Aiko finally spoke. My son died in my arms. Her voice was barely a whisper, as if the syllables hurt to form. Jikun did not flinch. She stared at the ground. I couldn't save him. Silence. But I don't want to forget him either. I'm afraid if I stop grieving, I'll let him go. More silence. But in it, she heard something. Acceptance. For the first time, she allowed the silence to hold both her sorrow and her love, both her guilt and her memory, and somehow it was enough. Before she left the monastery, Jikun handed her a small scroll. On it was written only one word, Aragamama, a Zen term meaning to accept things just as they are. Evening reflection. The Buddha once said, be a lamp unto yourself. But before we can be that light, we must sit in the dark without fear. Tonight, before sleep, reflect. Where in your life are you trying too hard to fix someone else's pain? Where are you rushing to respond instead of simply being present? Close your eyes, breathe. Let there be space for sorrow, for silence, for stillness. Not every wound needs a word. Some only need your quiet hand resting beside them. Story 7. The Candle in the Rain. Soundscape, rain on paper walls. A single candle flickers. Outside, the wind hums low, like a lullaby that's forgotten its lyrics. There was once a tiny hermitage perched on the edge of the woods, near a path so rarely travelled that even the moss seemed undisturbed. Within it lived a solitary nun named Xiun. Her name meant violet cloud. Her face was round and kind, though her eyes often carried the soft weight of someone who had seen much sorrow and asked little of life. She spent her days tending to the garden, writing poetry, and lighting candles at dusk, not out of necessity, but as an offering to the evening. Each flame, she believed, was a prayer without words. One day, a traveller arrived, soaked and shivering. She was a young woman, named Ray, and her eyes betrayed a sadness so deep it seemed older than she was. Her voice barely rose above the rain. "I don't know where else to go," she said. "I'm tired." Xion simply bowed. "Then rest," she said, and led her inside without question. There was no interrogation, no need to explain, just warm tea, dry robes, and the flicker of candlelight. That night, Ray cried without sound. Her grief had followed her for years, unresolved, undefined, but ever present. It wasn't one loss, but many. A childhood cut short by conflict, a mother lost to illness, a love abandoned without explanation. Like small drops of rain, each sorrow had collected inside her, until her soul was a flood she could no longer contain. Xiun did not interrupt. She sat beside the girl, her presence soft and wide, like a tree that doesn't ask the bird why it weeps beneath its branches. The candle between them flickered as the wind slid beneath the door. Ray reached out to shield it. "It might go out," she whispered. Xiun smiled gently. "And if it does, we light another, or we sit in the dark," the metaphor of the flame. In Zen, the candle is a profound symbol, not just of awareness, but of fragility, of the light that lives within all of us, however flickering, however threatened by the wind. Xiun's words were not metaphorical comfort, they were instruction, a lesson in gentleness. So often we fear our sadness. We see it as a storm to run from. But Zen invites us to sit beside it, to offer it tea, to let the candle tremble and still trust its warmth. Buddhist teaching. In the Buddha's teachings, there is a lesser discussed but powerful concept: soka, grief, sorrow. The Buddha did not deny sadness. He walked among burning pyres and grieving mothers. He wept when his close disciples died. He never said, "Don't feel." He said, "Hold suffering with the same hands you hold joy." He taught that just as joy arises and fades, so too does grief. But to reject it, to fight or numb it, is to prolong its stay. Through mindfulness, we do not solve sadness. We cradle it, like a child waking from a nightmare. Psychological insight. Modern psychology echoes this with the concept of emotional regulation through compassionate witnessing. When we meet sadness with self-judgment, telling ourselves this is weakness or I should be over this, we deepen our suffering. This is called secondary suffering, the pain we create by resisting what already hurts. But when we simply acknowledge the sadness, label it gently. This is grief, this is loneliness, this is longing, and breathe into it. Something shifts. The nervous system calms. The heart softens. Sadness, when witnessed without resistance, becomes a companion, not an enemy. Back to the story. The days passed. Ray stayed. She tended to the garden with Shun, walked barefoot in the morning dew, lit candles without reason. Each evening, they sat in silence. Sometimes Ray cried. Sometimes she didn't. But each time, Shun was there, never trying to push the sadness away, never offering toxic cheerfulness, just space, warmth, presence. One evening, Ray whispered, "Do you ever feel sad too?" Shun nodded. "Every day." Ray looked surprised. "But you seem so peaceful." Shun stared into the candles' flame. Peace is not the absence of sadness. It's the willingness to sit beside it without fear. The rain returns. That night, a storm arrived. The wind howled, rattling the paper walls. Candles blew out one by one. Ray panicked. What if the roof leaks? What if we lose light? Shun touched her hand. Then we listened to the rain. They sat in the dark, the storm crashing around them, the sound of water everywhere. And yet, Ray found herself breathing slower, not because she was no longer sad, but because she was no longer alone inside it. The next morning, the sky was clear, and in the mud outside, the violets had bloomed. Evening reflection. The Buddha once said, "Just as a mother watches over her child with boundless love, so should we hold each feeling with kindness." Tonight, if sadness visits you, do not turn it away. Make tea, light a candle, and if the candle goes out, do not panic. You may light another, or you may sit with the dark. Breathe, cry if you must. Let the grief move like rain across your roof. You are not broken. You are becoming gentle. And in gentleness, we heal. Story 8. The Mirror in the Sand. Soundscape. A seaside breeze. Soft waves folding onto shore. A wooden wind chime clicks irregularly in the distance, slow and accidental. There was once a temple by the sea, built from driftwood and salt-stained stone. The monks there lived simply, fishing in the mornings, tending to tide-swept gardens, writing haiku in the margins of silence. Among them was a boy named Haru. He was not yet a monk, but an orphan taken in by the temple after a great storm had taken both his parents and his home. He had survived clinging to the wreckage of his family's boat, eyes full of salt and loss. Though the monks offered him safety and rice and a place to sleep, Haru felt invisible, not in their eyes, but in the eyes of the universe. He believed that his life, now reduced to chores and silence, was small, meaningless, forgotten. He would often sit on the rocks facing the water, throwing pebbles into the tide, wondering why he had been spared. One day, the old abbot, Master Kenzo, asked him to help clean the meditation garden. It was a sparse, windswept courtyard with sand patterns that shifted daily. In the center lay a single broken mirror, half buried, its frame splintered. Haru asked, "Why do you keep this? It's ruined." Kenzo smiled. "Because it still reflects." Haru frowned. "But it's cracked. Ugly." Kenzo knelt beside it. Not everything must be whole to be beautiful. Sometimes brokenness lets the light in from unexpected angles. He handed Haru a bamboo broom. Clean around it. Watch how the sand glows when the sun hits the glass. A quiet discovery. Over the next few days, Haru did as he was told. He swept around the mirror. At first, he did so out of obligation, but slowly, something began to shift. He noticed how the light changed at different hours, how the cracked surface of the mirror caught shadows and turned them into streaks of gold, how each breeze rearranged the grains of sand, and yet the garden was never wrong, just different. One morning, as he leaned over the mirror, he caught a glimpse, not just of his face, but of the sky reflected behind it, a pale blue, quiet and endless. He stared at his own image, still young, still grieving, but something softer now lived behind his eyes. For the first time, he whispered, "Maybe I'm not forgotten." Zen teaching. In Zen, beauty is not measured by symmetry, by shine, or by the extraordinary. It is measured by presence. The monk who paints a single stroke of ink and leaves the page empty is not careless. He is inviting you to notice what is already there. The moss on the stone, the echo between words, the light in a broken mirror. When you truly see, said the old masters, you will find eternity in a single leaf. Haru had believed that only the dramatic, the heroic, the flawless had value. But Zen teaches that value lies in the ordinary, in the unnoticed, that which is simple, imperfect, but real. Buddhist wisdom. The Buddha taught sampajanya, clear comprehension, a mind that not only knows where it is, but sees fully into what it is doing. He encouraged walking meditation, not just to relax the body, but to become intimate with the small, the soil, the breath, the rise and fall of the foot, the flick of an ant's antennae. There is no enlightenment outside of this moment, no miracle greater than this breath, no shrine more sacred than this cracked mirror in the sand. Psychological reflection. In our modern world, many live with invisible grief, the feeling that their lives don't matter unless they are extraordinary. Social media tells us that only the loudest, the most beautiful, the most successful deserve attention. But psychological studies show that meaning is not found in grand events, but in small acts of mindfulness. Brewing tea with care, making eye contact, watching sunlight shift across a room. This is called everyday transcendence, finding sacredness in simplicity. Haru's healing did not come from visions or mantras, but from sweeping sand and noticing how the world shimmered through, a broken thing, back to the sea. Seasons changed. Haru grew older. The mirror remained cracked. The garden continued to shift. One day, a group of travelers arrived at the temple. Among them was a child who had stopped speaking since her mother had died. As the others entered the hall, Haru stayed with the girl. He led her silently to the meditation garden. They sat together beside the mirror. He said nothing. She reached out and touched the glass. Her voice, hoarse from disuse, broke the silence. "It's beautiful," Haru nodded. He did not say, "It's broken." He did not say, "Look harder." He simply smiled, and the sea, behind them, continued to breathe. Evening reflection. The Buddha once said, "If your mind is clear, all of life becomes meditation." Tonight, before sleep, ask yourself, where are you overlooking beauty? What part of your life have you judged as too plain, too small, too broken? Now, close your eyes. Picture the cracked mirror. Let it reflect your breath, your sorrow, your softness. You are not forgotten. You are not ordinary. You are made of light, dancing through sand. Sleep now, not to escape the world, but to return to it gently in the morning, ready to see. Story 9. The empty chair. Soundscape. A kettle steaming. Wind brushing over dry grass. Somewhere, a floorboard creaks. A distant door closes slowly and softly. There was a small tea room atop a hill surrounded by fields of barley and pine. It belonged to an elderly man named Toma, a retired calligrapher who once painted the sutras in long, fluid strokes. His hands had since stiffened, but his heart had softened like parchment kissed by time. Inside his tea room were 2 chairs. One was always empty. Each morning he set tea for 2, steeping the leaves in silence, pouring carefully, placing a cup on the empty chair's side. Then he would bow. To whom? No one quite knew. Children in the village whispered stories, that he spoke with ghosts or that the chair belonged to a spirit. Others believed he had lost a lover long ago and refused to move on. But Toma never explained. He simply said, "This cup is not for the one who is gone. It is for the space they still hold." One day, a young woman named Sumi arrived at Toma's, or hilltop path. She was a poet, though her pen had not touched paper in months. Grief had emptied her, of words, of appetite, of laughter. She had recently lost her grandmother, the only family she had left. Her solitude was no longer quiet. It was a ringing bell, echoing too loudly in the stillness of her apartment. She had come to the village on advice from an old friend who told her, "Go see the man with the empty chair. He knows something about the ache you carry." When she arrived, Toma welcomed her with a bow, then motioned for her to sit on the empty side. "But I don't belong there," she whispered. Toma only smiled. "Neither did I, at first." The tea ceremony. He poured tea for them both. Sumi sipped hers slowly, her hands trembling. The cup was warm, solid, real, unlike the hollow ache that followed her everywhere. She looked at the chair across from her. "Who used to sit here?" she finally asked. Toma stirred his tea, but did not answer directly. "Loneliness," he said, "is not the absence of others. It's the absence of presence with ourselves." Sumi frowned. "So you set tea for yourself?" He shook his head gently. "I set it for the part of me I forget to love when I feel alone." Zen reflection. In Zen practice, there is a profound teaching. Do not escape solitude. Enter it. Bow to it. Make tea for it. Where many philosophies teach overcoming loneliness through connection, Zen begins elsewhere. It says, "Make peace with the aloneness itself, not as punishment, but as a teacher." The empty chair is not a void. It is a doorway, an invitation to return to the self not as exile, but as companion. "When you are alone," said the Zen poet Ryokan, "the moon is your friend, and so is the shadow of the bamboo." Buddhist insight. The Buddha spent many years alone in forests, beneath trees, beside rivers, not because he hated people, but because he understood that true companionship begins within. He taught the value of sati, mindful presence, with the breath, with the body, with one's own wandering mind. "Better than 1,000 hollow words," he said, "is one word that brings peace." And sometimes that word is silence, a full cup placed before an empty chair. Psychological understanding. From a psychological perspective, loneliness is not just social absence, it is a perceived disconnection even in a crowd. Studies show that the most powerful remedy is not always company, but self-compassion and ritual. Toma's tea practice was a form of ritualized presence, a way of honoring both memory and current self. It anchored him. It told his nervous system, I am here, I am with myself. Sumi's grief, like so many, had turned her solitude into self-abandonment. She didn't just miss her grandmother. She had stopped meeting herself, the tea, the silence, the chair. It called her back. Transformation. The next morning, she returned. Toma had already set the cups. Today, he said gently, we switch chairs. She sat in the place once empty. This time, when the tea was poured, she bowed, not to Toma, not to his past, but to her own aloneness. And for the first time, she did not flinch. That evening, she walked through the barley fields, alone, but the wind felt different. Not cold, but companionable. She began writing again. A line, then another. Not about joy, not yet, but about the sacredness of the space her grandmother had left, and the way it shimmered inside her, like a light that does not need to be touched to be felt. Evening reflection. The Buddha once said, you, yourself, as much as anyone in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. Tonight, before you sleep, find an empty chair, real or imagined. Do not fear it. Place your hand over your heart. Breathe. Say silently, this seat is for the part of me that aches. I do not need to fill it with noise. I will sit beside it and wait. You are not abandoned. You are with yourself now, and that is a beginning. Story 10. The Lantern in the Fog. Soundscape, dense fog. Lantern glass tapping gently in the breeze. A slow rhythmic crunch of footsteps on gravel, dissolving into stillness. There was a footpath high in the mountains, known to travelers as the Whispering Way. No signs marked its start. No maps showed its end. It meandered through forests and across streams, sometimes vanishing into fog so thick you could not see your hand before your face. Few dared walk it after dark, but among those who did, stories began to spread of a lone figure who wandered the path each night, carrying a single lantern whose light barely reached more than a few feet ahead. Some said he was a monk, others a ghost, but his name was Renji, and he was very much alive. Renji had once been a renowned physician in a distant city. Precise, brilliant, in control. He saved lives daily until the day he could not. A young boy, no older than 7, died on his table. A boy with eyes like stars. A boy who whispered, "Will it hurt?" just before the sedative took hold. Renji had said, "No," but it had. In ways he hadn't foreseen, in ways he could not forgive. He left everything behind that day. His home, his name, his white coat. He wandered until he arrived in the mountains, empty and disoriented. The fog, he thought, matched his soul, and so he walked, night after night, one lantern, one path, no destination. One evening, he came upon a traveller, lost, soaked from rain, panicked. "I can't see the road," the traveller cried. "How can we walk in this?" Renji simply held up his lantern. Its golden glow reached just far enough to reveal 3 small stones on the trail ahead. "It is enough to see the next step," he said, "the essence of the lantern." In Zen, clarity is not the same as certainty. You are not meant to see the whole path at once, only the ground beneath, your feet. The lantern does not light the end of the road, it lights this moment, and that is enough. When walking, says the Zen proverb, just walk. The path reveals itself under the feet that trust. Buddhist teaching. The Buddha spoke often of faith, not blind belief, but a kind of steady confidence in the Dharma, in the truth that everything arises, changes, and passes. In the Avijja Sutta, he described ignorance not as lack of knowledge, but as the refusal to see the present clearly. We look too far, we grasp, we panic when we cannot predict. But the path to awakening is walked step by step, breath by breath. Just as the lantern illuminates the fog not by force, but by quiet glow, so too does mindfulness reveal what we need, in the moment we need it. Psychological perspective. In modern life, we are conditioned to seek guarantees. We want 5-year plans, clear outcomes, closure. But life offers ambiguity, illness, change, delays, unknowns. This triggers anxiety, especially in those who've experienced trauma where unpredictability once meant danger. The nervous system wires itself to fear the unseen. But healing happens not in knowing the whole journey, but in learning to feel safe, not knowing. In trauma recovery, this is called window of tolerance expansion, increasing our ability to stay grounded in uncertainty. Renji's lantern was not just light, it was presence, soft, consistent, unhurried. A symbol of inner steadiness in the face of the unclear, the travelers. Renji never turned anyone away. When he met others on the path, he would not give them maps. He simply walked beside them, quiet, steady, one step, one breath, one glow. Some tried to rush ahead. They stumbled. Some tried to wait for the fog to clear. It never did. Only those who walked slowly by the reach of the lantern began to smile again, not because they had answers, but because they were no longer afraid of the question. A night of surrender. One night, Renji found himself alone again. The fog was heavier than usual. Even the lantern struggled to pierce it. He paused. For the first time in years, he did not ask where he was going, or why. He just breathed. The fog somehow seemed warmer that night, like a blanket instead of a wall. He whispered into the night, "I do not need to see the end to keep walking." Evening reflection. The Buddha said, "If the traveler cannot see the road ahead, let them trust their step. If they cannot see the sky, let them feel the breath." Tonight, before sleep, ask yourself, what part of your life feels uncertain? What answer are you waiting for before you move? Now, imagine holding a lantern, not to light the future, just to see this moment. Your breath, your body, your courage. Let that be enough. Let the fog stay. Let the light stay. Let yourself keep walking. Story 11. The Sparrow in the Window. Soundscape. Early morning breeze through thin paper shutters. A sparrow chirps once. Distantly, the first temple bell of the day resonates like a memory returning home. In a quiet town where fog lifted slowly, from the rooftops and old women watered flower pots before dawn, there lived a retired schoolteacher named Michiko. Her home was small and filled with books and fading photographs. Her husband's fishing hat still hung by the door, untouched. He had passed 3 years before. Since then, Michiko had lived gently, but with a heaviness, like someone holding an umbrella long after the storm had passed, just in case. She swept the floor, brewed green tea, folded clothes that no longer fit anyone, but still carried scent. She laughed sometimes, but only with her mouth. She had forgotten how joy truly felt. One morning, As she opened her kitchen window to air the tatami room, a sparrow flew in. It was small and brown and trembling. It fluttered madly, crashing into the paper screens, knocking over a vase, scattering petals across the floor. Michiko panicked. She chased it with a towel, opening every window, trying to guide it out. But the bird only flapped harder, more frantically, until, at last, it collapsed on the wooden floor, sides heaving. She knelt beside it, heart pounding, and then she stopped. Not just her hands, but something deeper. Instead of ushering it out, she sat down. Quiet, breath matching the bird's tiny rhythm. "I'm scared too," she whispered. A shift. For many long minutes they sat like that, the woman and the bird, both startled by a world they didn't fully understand anymore. The bird didn't fly away, not yet, but neither did it fight, and Michiko, for the first time in months, felt her own body soften, not because the sadness had gone, but because something else had arrived, quietly, gently. Curiosity. The Zen moment. In Zen, it is said that joy does not return by force. It returns when we stop guarding the door so tightly. When you stop chasing butterflies, says the Zen koan, they land on your shoulder. Michiko had spent 3 years trying not to break, and in doing so, had closed the window through, which joy might enter. But the sparrow did not knock. It burst in, chaotic and uninvited. Just like joy sometimes does, clumsy, wild, undeserved. Zen teaches us not to prepare for joy, but to be open to it in all its unexpected forms. Buddhist. Wisdom. The Buddha once said, "Happiness does not depend on what you have or who you are. It solely relies on what you think, but more than thought, joy requires space." In the Metta Sutta, we are told to radiate kindness not only outward, but inward, to forgive ourselves for our own numbness, to understand that sorrow contracts us, and that is human. Joy can be shy, and must be welcomed slowly. The middle path is not absence of grief. It is grief and joy sharing tea at the same table. Psychological perspective. In psychology, we speak of anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure after trauma or loss. It is not a lack of love, but a brain's attempt to protect itself from being hurt again. But neuroscience shows that gentle exposure to beauty, to play, to small delight, can reawaken the nervous system's capacity for joy. Michiko's moment with the sparrow was limbic resonance, her nervous system attuning to another fragile being. In that mirror, she found herself not just mourning, but alive. The return. The bird stayed for 2 hours. Eventually, it fluttered up to the windowsill and, without a sound, took flight. Michiko stood, staring at the open sky. She did not cry. Not this time. She made herself another cup of tea. Then she opened every window in the house, not to let anything out, but to let something in. And when the sun slipped low, she placed a small bowl of crumbs on the windowsill. "Just in case," she said, and smiled. The next morning, a single chirp broke the silence of dawn. The sparrow had returned. It didn't come inside. It sat on the ledge, looked at her, then flew away again. But Michiko understood. Joy is not something we capture. It visits, it rests, it reminds. And then, it goes, but it always leaves the window ajar. Evening reflection. The Buddha once said, if we could see the miracle of a single flower clearly, our whole life would change. Tonight, before sleep, ask yourself, when was the last time you let joy in? Unprepared, unfiltered, unearned. Now, close your eyes. Picture A window. Open it, without expectation. Let the breeze come. Let the sorrow stay. And if joy arrives, however small, however fluttering, let it perch a while. You don't have to hold it. You only have to notice it. And let your heart be its resting place. Story 12. The ink that faded. Soundscape. A brush dipping into an inkstone. Distant rain tapping on roof tiles. Pages turning slowly, deliberately, like breaths. In a temple built against the spine of a mountain, where clouds slipped through, pine branches like whispered prayers, lived a calligrapher named Sora. Once renowned across provinces, Sora had written for emperors, scholars, and monks. His scrolls hung in sacred halls and royal chambers. His strokes were said to breathe with the wind, but now he wrote only for himself. Each morning, he would grind his own ink, slow, circular motions, releasing scent and memory. Then he would dip the brush and write one word. Only one. Not poems, not prayers. Just a single character. He did this every day. Then he would set the paper out on the veranda to dry, and by evening, the rain or mist would often blur the ink. He never seemed to mind. One afternoon, a visitor came, a young artist named Kaide in search of mastery. She had studied every form of calligraphy, every brushstroke method, but still, something was missing in her art. It felt forced, unalive. She had heard whispers of the old master in the mountains who had stopped trying, and yet whose work had never been more powerful. When she arrived, Sora served her tea and said nothing of his past. Instead, he placed a fresh page in front of her and a brush. "Write your name," he said. Kaide smiled confidently, then paused. "My name as in who I am." Sora nodded once. She dipped the brush and wrote, "Kaide." Bold, sharp, precise. Sora studied the page. Then gently, he picked it up, walked outside, and placed it in the rain. Kaide gasped. "Why did you do that?" Sora replied, "Because it is not yet true." The unraveling. Kaide was indignant. "I've trained for years. I've worked so hard to define myself, to be excellent." Sora looked out into the mist. "And that is your burden." He returned to the table, dipped his brush, and wrote a single word. Mu. Emptiness. Nothingness. Then he placed it beside her and walked away. The lesson beneath the ink. For days, Kaide stayed. She watched Sora write a word each morning and let it fade by night. She asked him, "Why do you let the rain destroy your work?" Sora responded, "If it is true, it will remain, even when the form is gone." The Zen principle. In Zen, identity is not a sculpture to be preserved. It is a cloud, a wave, a flame flickering in wind. The practice is not to define who we are, but to let go of who we were 5 minutes ago. To return to beginner's mind, or shoshin, a mind free of conclusions. The ink fades, says the Zen master, but the practice remains. We are not our labels, not our careers, not our history. We are the breath that continues, the presence that writes again. Buddhist wisdom. The Buddha taught anatta, non-self, not as nihilism, but as liberation, a release from the prison of fixed identity. He said, "Just as the candle is not the flame, the wax, or the smoke, but all of these and none, so too are you." Suffering often arises when we cling to outdated versions of ourselves, when we mistake roles for reality. The doctor who no longer heals, the artist who can no longer draw, the parent whose children have grown. But the Dharma invites us to bow, to change, not as loss, but as evolution. Psychological perspective. In psychological terms, this process is akin to ego dissolution, a gentle unraveling of the narrative self, the story we tell about who we are. While a coherent identity is important, it becomes a cage when it resists change. Practices like mindfulness and self-inquiry allow us to disidentify from outdated roles and embrace fluidity. Kaede, in holding tightly to her identity as the artist, had suffocated her own expression. What she needed wasn't more form, it was freedom. The transformation. On her 7th day, Kaede rose early. Before Sora could offer her paper, she brought her own. She ground the ink in silence, dipped the brush, and she did not write her name. She wrote, "Now." Then she placed the paper outside in the drizzle, stepped back and watched it blur. Slowly, beautifully. She did not flinch. Sora smiled. "You've begun." Evening reflection. The Buddha once said, "To truly live, you must die before you die." Tonight, ask yourself, what names do you carry too tightly? What roles, titles, or identities feel too small for who you are becoming? Close your eyes. Imagine the rain falling gently on a page. Let your name blur. Let your story soften. You are not your past. You are the space that holds all stories and needs none to be whole. Sleep as the sky does. Formless, vast, free. Story 13. The gate that opens inward. Soundscape. Wooden chimes echo softly through a temple courtyard. A breeze slips between the eaves. In the distance, a gate creaks once and closes. In the eastern province of Nagano, nestled in a valley that caught clouds like hands cupping water, there stood a temple known simply as Kaimun, the gate. But this temple had no visible gate. Pilgrims often arrived confused, walking circles around its mossy walls. Some knocked. Some called out. Others wandered off, assuming they had come to the wrong place. But those who stayed were eventually met by a monk named Ryusei, tall, with silver-streaked hair and eyes like mountain dusk. He welcomed them in silence, bowed, and pointed not to a door, but to a mirror that stood at the center of the outer garden. In carved wood beneath the mirror, a single phrase: "The gate you seek opens only inward." One autumn day, a man named Hiroshi arrived. He was a successful architect from the city, known for his towering steel buildings and mathematical mind. But lately, his clarity had collapsed. His wife had left him. His son barely spoke to him. Projects once full of purpose now felt hollow. "I've come for answers," he said to Ryusei. The monk offered him tea, then pointed wordlessly to the mirror. Hiroshi frowned. "I didn't come for riddles." Still, something in the stillness made him stay. That evening, Hiroshi sat before the mirror, waiting for something to appear, an insight, a vision, anything. He waited through dusk, through the rising wind, through the deepening dark. At one point, he leaned forward and whispered, "Tell me what to do." The mirror said nothing, but his own reflection stared back. Tired, confused, searching, he felt foolish, but he stayed, the silent threshold. For 3 days, Hiroshi remained at the temple. Ryusei spoke no words, asked no questions. He simply offered food, warmth, and the mirror. On the 4th morning, Hiroshi finally asked, "What is this mirror for?" Ryusei sat beside him. "It is not to show you what you look like. It is to show you what is looking." Zen wisdom. In a Zen practice, the metaphor of the gate is not about entry into a temple or place, but a threshold of awareness. It is the moment we stop searching outside and turn our gaze inward. Zen asks not, "What is the answer?" but, "Who is asking?" "The finger pointing at the moon is not the moon," said a famous Zen master. Do not mistake the teaching for the truth. The gate, in its deepest form, is the moment you stop chasing and begin witnessing. When the seeker dissolves into the scene. Buddhist teaching. The Buddha taught that each being holds within them the seed of awakening. Called the Tathagata Garbha, or Buddha nature, he said, "Be ye lamps unto yourselves, be ye refugees unto yourselves." This was not an invitation to isolation, but to inner sovereignty, a knowing that the truth is not a doctrine imposed, but a flame discovered within. The Dharma does not give us answers. It points us inward, so that we may learn to ask better questions. Psychological insight. In psychology, the quest for answers often masks an unwillingness to sit with discomfort. We seek external solutions, jobs, lovers, affirmations, hoping they will resolve internal confusion. But therapeutic traditions, especially those rooted in mindfulness and depth psychology, remind us that insight must be embodied. It arises from within, not from instruction. The mirror in Ryuse's temple was not magic. It was a mirror, but Hiroshi had never looked at himself without a role, not as father, husband, builder, but simply as a being, breathing, the quiet turning. One night, Hiroshi sat before the mirror and did something different. He did not ask questions. He did not resist the silence. He just looked, and he saw, not answers, but truth. His sadness, his pride, his longing, his younger self, his fear of being ordinary, his hope of still being worthy. He wept, not because he was broken, but because he realized he had always been whole, but had forgotten to look within. A new design. Before leaving, Ryusei handed him a single folded paper. On it was a sketch of a gate, but it opened toward the viewer, not away. Hiroshi smiled. Back in the city, he designed a new structure, a garden pavilion with no walls, only mirrors placed at various angles. At its center, a single bench and the words, "Sit until you are no longer seeking, then stand and walk through." People came. Some walked past it. Some sat. A few cried, and one woman wrote in the guest book, "This place didn't give me what I wanted. It gave me what I needed myself." Evening reflection. The Buddha once said, "Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without." Tonight, before sleep, find a mirror, not to check your face, but to look deeper. Ask not, "What should I do?" but, "Who is it that is asking?" Then, be still. Let the gate open inward and rest in the quiet wonder of meeting yourself. Story 14. The cloud that stopped pretending. Soundscape, high altitude wind, slow movement of air across open land, the soft thunder of a sky thinking about rain. Then, silence. There was a mountain so tall it sliced clouds like cloth across stone. At its peak stood a hermit hut, barely more than sticks and earth, always kissed by wind. In that hut lived a monk named Natsu, whose name meant summer. And yet he preferred the cold. No one knew why he had gone to the mountain. Rumor said he had once been the abbot of a great temple, but left suddenly one spring, abandoning titles, robes, and disciples. Others whispered of heartbreak. Some said madness, but the truth was simpler. One day, he had grown tired of pretending. Down, in the village, everyone wore masks, not the kind made of cloth or wood, but the kind worn on the soul, smiles when the heart ached, apologies when anger boiled, kindness to hide resentment, achievement to conceal emptiness. Natsu had mastered them all. He was respected, loved, quoted. But one morning, after a lavish ceremony where he had spoken of impermanence while clinging secretly to his own image, he returned to his room and looked in the mirror, and for the first time he whispered, "This is not me." He left the temple that night. No ceremony, no farewell, just a robe, a bowl, and the sky. Life above the clouds. On the mountain, there were no masks. The wind did not ask him to smile. The stones did not expect him to speak. The clouds passed freely, changing shape without apology. Some days, Natsu wept. Some days, he laughed at birds. He began to forget who he had once pretended to be, and in that forgetting, he began to remember his true self. One afternoon, as he sat watching the sky, a traveler arrived, a young executive named Rin, escaping burnout, performance reviews, and a life built on applause. She bowed and asked, "Master, what is the secret to peace?" Natsu pointed to the sky. "What do you see?" Rin looked up. "Clouds." "What are they doing?" She shrugged. "Moving." "Are they trying to be the sun or the mountain?" "No." Natsu smiled. "Then why are you trying to be anything but what you are?" Zen wisdom. Zen teaches that the self is not something to perform. It is something to return to. Like a path beneath your feet, you forgot you were already walking. "The wild geese do not intend to cast their reflection," said Zen Master Dogen. "The water has no mind to receive their image. We suffer when we manipulate the water, when we edit our reflection, when we chase approval, even from ourselves. But peace comes when we become like the cloud, free to be formless, to pass without permission, to shift shape with honesty." Buddhist insight. The Buddha warned of attachment to self-view, the tendency to cling to a fixed identity, a story, a face. He said, "What you think, you become, but what you cling to, you suffer." The goal is not to become someone better, it is to become someone real. Authenticity in Buddhist practice is not about being perfect, it is about being whole, even when broken, even when unsure, even when changing. Psychological perspective. In modern psychology, this is known as self-congruence, when your internal experience matches your external expression. When there's a gap between how we feel and how we behave, we develop anxiety, fatigue, and even depression. Our nervous system senses danger when we perform for belonging. But when we dare to be honest, even gently, our body relaxes. The mask drops, and we begin to breathe again. Natsu's retreat was not rejection of society. It was a reclamation of authenticity, the letting go. Rin stayed for 2 days. She spoke of boardrooms and betrayals, of pretending to be strong, of the exhaustion of being on all the time. Natsu said little, but before she left, he gave her a slip of rice paper. On it, a single word, utsuroi, the Japanese term for transience, transformation, the freedom to shift. "It means," he said, "you do not have to stay who you were." Rin bowed, tears in her eyes. That night, she took off her expensive watch and her borrowed smile, and for the first time slept without performance. The wind outside carried the clouds across the stars, and no one asked them to stop. Evening reflection. Buddha once said, "The root of suffering is attachment, but not just to things, to roles, to expectations, to the person we've pretended to be. Tonight, before you sleep, ask yourself, where are you performing? Where are you holding your breath to be loved? Now, breathe. Let the mask slide. Let the cloud drift. Say to yourself, I no longer need to pretend to be okay. I only need to be real. Let that truth be enough. Story 15. The cup that spilled itself. Soundscape. Water dripping slowly into an old wooden basin. A breeze slips under a paper screen. Somewhere, a small cup falls, and the sound of liquid hitting the floor. In a sleepy village at the edge of an old cedar forest, there was a tea house named Stillness Rising. It was run by a woman named Emma, who wore silence the way others wore robes, lightly with purpose. Emma was not a monk nor a teacher. She poured tea, but those who drank from her cups often left different than when they arrived, some lighter, some weeping, some walking more slowly, as if the ground had become sacred without their noticing. No one knew why. The tea house was simple: bamboo walls, tatami mats worn smooth, and low wooden tables polished by decades of elbows and tears. But at the center of the room stood an unusual object, a large lopsided clay cup. It sat on a pedestal, cracked and chipped, forever half filled with water. Every morning, Emma would pour just enough to reach the rim, and every few hours, it would overflow. When asked why she didn't adjust the level, she simply replied, "Some cups need to spill themselves." One rainy afternoon, a man arrived. His name was Satoshi. He was quiet, well-dressed, and carried the posture of someone holding something heavy, but so tightly for so long, he no longer noticed the weight. He asked for oolong. Emma nodded. He didn't speak again until the third cup. Then, suddenly, without warning, he said, "I haven't cried since my father died. Not once. That was 10 years ago." Emma poured more tea. "How do you know you haven't?" He blinked. "I would remember." She pointed to the center of the room. Not everything spills through the eyes, the unseen overflow. Satoshi stared at the cracked cup. "It's broken." "Only cracked," she replied. "And yet it still holds water." He shook his head. "But it spills." Emma smiled. "Yes, it makes room." Zen teaching. In Zen, emotions are not suppressed nor idolized. They are treated as weather, passing, real, but not permanent. Zen does not demand we fix our grief, nor erase our anger. It invites us to hold the cup, feel the heat, notice the overflow. "Let the tears fall," one teacher said. They water the truth. We carry so much. Stories, grief, shame, guilt, like full cups in trembling hands, and yet we rarely stop to set them down. Buddhist wisdom. The Buddha taught dukkha, suffering, as a core truth of life, but he also taught its cause, clinging, holding too tightly to what wants to pass, gripping sorrow like a badge, anger like a shield. He said, "You can only lose what you cling to." When we soften that grip, even briefly, release begins, healing begins, flow begins. Emma's cup spilled not because it was faulty, but because it could not hold more, just like Satoshi, psychological reflection. In trauma therapy, there's a concept called emotional suppression, when we consciously or unconsciously avoid expressing painful feelings. Research shows this doesn't make emotions go away. It buries them in the body. They show up in muscle, tension, chronic fatigue, anxiety, insomnia. But when we create safe space to feel, emotions rise, peak and fall like waves. In therapy, in mindfulness, in tears over tea. Sometimes, all the body needs is permission to spill, the breaking open. That evening, as the last guest left, Emma found Satoshi still sitting, cup in hand. His eyes were wide, but not tearful. His hand shook slightly. She sat beside him. "I think I'm full," he said. She gently placed his cup on the table. Then, let it pour. He didn't sob. He didn't speak. But his shoulders lowered, his face softened, and a breath left his lungs as if it had been waiting 10 years. A return. Satoshi returned a week later. He brought no questions. No stories, just silence. He sat beside the cracked cup in the center of the room. It overflowed again, but this time he smiled. Evening reflection. The Buddha once said, "Just as rain fills a broken jar, so too does pain fill the heart that never empties." Tonight before sleep, ask yourself, what am I holding that is ready to spill? Now, close your eyes. Picture a cup, your cup. Is it heavy, full, warm? Can you just for tonight allow it to tip? Let what spills spill. Let what stays stay. You are not broken. You are simply full. And release is a kind of love. Story 16. The garden that grew in silence. Soundscape. Morning dew dripping from leaves. A rake gently brushing gravel. The occasional flutter of wings. Silence that feels like it's listening. There was a monastery tucked inside a valley where no road reached, only footpaths known by deer and monks. And in that monastery was a garden. It was not grand. There were no rare flowers or elaborate fountains. Just moss-covered stones, winding gravel paths, and small clusters of wildflowers that bloomed without announcement. What made this garden remarkable was that no one spoke within it, not even a whisper. It was known as the Garden of Unspoken Things. The gardener was an old monk named Sho. He had been silent for over 40 years, not because he had taken a vow, but because, as he once wrote in a letter, "The deeper I listened, the fewer words I needed." Each day, Sho tended the earth with reverence. He touched each plant like it had a story to tell. He never wore gloves. He let the dirt rest under his nails, let the morning sun stain his arms. Visitors came from faraway cities, not to hear Dharma talks, not to ask questions, but to sit in that garden, to listen, not to words, but to what had no language. One spring, a woman named Aya arrived. She had not spoken in weeks. She was a therapist who had lost a patient to suicide, a young man she'd been treating for 2 years. She had done everything. Right, follow-ups, safety plans, compassion. But one evening, he simply vanished and left behind a note with 3 words, "I'm still broken." Aya closed her practice. She stopped seeing friends. She carried the guilt like stone beneath her ribs. She came to the garden not for healing. She no longer believed in that word. She came because someone had told her, "Go where silence doesn't. Ask for anything." Sho met her with a bow. He gave her a bamboo rake and gestured toward a section of the path overgrown with leaves. She nodded and began. The tending. At first, Aya moved stiffly. She kept thinking of her training. How trauma lives in the body. How grief can calcify the heart. But none of that mattered here. Sho didn't ask her to explain. The garden didn't ask her to justify. The silence didn't ask her to perform. It simply held her. Each day, she raked, watered, pulled weeds. Sho never spoke. But sometimes he would leave a small stone on her path, a flower where she sat, once a bowl of fresh rainwater, and slowly Aya's breath began to deepen. Her shoulders softened, the thoughts didn't stop, but they began to quiet. She still felt sorrow, but no longer shame. Zen understanding. Zen has always taught that healing does not always require explanation. Words can be bridges, but also barriers. There are wounds, too deep, too tangled, for language to untie. Not everything true can be said, said a Zen master. And not everything said is true. Sho's silence was not absence, it was presence made whole. Aya had spent her life holding space for others, but now, finally, the space held her. Buddhist teaching. The Buddha often retreated into forests alone. He called this noble silence, not the silence of avoidance, but of attunement. In the Satipatthana Sutta, he taught that awareness of body, breath, sensation, and mind, observed without comment, is itself the path to awakening. He once said, "When words are gone, only truth remains." Aya began to understand. She did not need to narrate her grief. She only needed to touch it, sit with it, rake it, water it, watch it grow wildflowers in its own time. Psychological insight. Modern neuroscience confirms what ancient teachings have long known. Co-regulation doesn't always require words. Safe presence, especially in silence, calms the nervous system. Touching soil, tending plants, moving rhythmically, all activate the vagus nerve, signaling, "You are safe now." For those in grief or guilt, talking can sometimes re-traumatize. But gardening, art, music, breath, these bypass the intellect and speak directly to the wounded nervous system. Aya didn't heal by explaining why she hurt. She healed by letting silence hold what words could not, a bloom. One day, as she raked the path near the small pond, Aya paused. The breeze stirred the leaves just as the sun broke through cloud. A single lotus bud, unnoticed before, had opened fully. Sho appeared beside her. He did not point. He simply placed a stone at her feet. On it, carved faintly, were 4 kanji, Xinjing Fenghua heart, silence, wind, bloom. Aya touched the stone. Her eyes filled, not with tears of sorrow, but of return. She stayed for 1 more week. Before she left, she placed a note on the bench where she used to sit. Sho would find it after she was gone. It read, "I came with a wound too loud to name. I leave with a silence that can hold it. Thank you for not asking me to be okay." Evening reflection. The Buddha once said, "If you are quiet enough, you will hear the flow of the universe. You will feel the rhythm of your own breath. And you will remember you belong." Tonight, before sleep, ask yourself, what pain am I still trying to explain? Now, imagine a garden. You do not need to speak there. You only need to sit, to breathe, to let the wind move through your branches, to let a flower bloom when it's ready. Silence is not absence. It is a field wide enough for healing. Sleep in that field tonight. Story 17. The drum that echoed alone. Soundscape. A steady wind across open fields. A lone drumbeat in the distance. Low, steady, hollow. Then stillness. There was a monastery perched between 2 hills, open to the wind on all sides. Within its grounds was a shrine unlike any other, not adorned with statues or incense. but with a single object placed at the center of a wooden platform. A large drum. It was old, its leather darkened by years of weather and touch, its frame bound together by thick rope and ritual. The monks called it Kokoro no Taiko, the drum of the heart. Anyone could strike it. No ritual, no permission. You did not need to know how to play. The only rule was, you must play it alone. Some struck it once, some for hours, some not at all, sitting beside it in silence, their hands trembling, unable to lift the stick. It was said that the drum did not echo through the valley. It echoed through the self. A boy named Nao came to the monastery at the age of 16. He had been orphaned young and raised by distant relatives who considered silence safer than sorrow. He was not abused, but neither was he seen. He had never raised his voice, never cried in front of anyone, never been asked, "What do you feel?" When he arrived, the monks welcomed him with gentle chores and quiet meals. They did not press him, but they led him eventually to the drum. "Why this?" he asked. The abbot, a man named Ensho, replied, "Because there are things words cannot carry, but sound can." The first strike. Now approached the drum timidly. He touched the mallet, a long wooden handle wrapped in old cloth. He hesitated, then struck it, just once. The sound that rang out was deep, like thunder that remembered being a whisper. It vibrated through his ribs. He stepped back. Something inside him moved, but he didn't know what. He returned the next day, and the next, and slowly he began to play, not with rhythm, not with technique, but with emotion, rage, grief, confusion, hope. He struck the drum until his arms ached, until he wept without knowing why, until something unspoken became understood. Zen, and the sound within. In Zen, expression is not always through speech. The bell, the flute, the brushstroke, the bowl, these are all voices of the inner self. When the drum sounds, it is not the hand that speaks, says the koan, but the heart that echoes. To play the drum alone is to meet yourself unmasked, to let the body release what the mind cannot articulate. It is to say, I do not need to name this feeling. I only need to give it space to move. Buddhist teaching. The Buddha taught of the 5 aggregates: form, sensation, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. Expression moves through all of these. Sometimes suffering lodges not in thoughts, but in the body's memory. That is why the Buddha encouraged chanting, walking, bowing, embodied practices where emotion is given shape beyond language. He said, what you feel, you can let go, but only if you first feel it. Psychological insight. Modern somatic psychology confirms this. Emotions that are unexpressed often become stored in the body, leading to chronic pain, disassociation, or anxiety. Therapies like EMDR, somatic experiencing, and expressive arts allow for non-verbal release. Movement, sound, touch, the drum at the monastery functioned like an emotional tuning fork. It gave Nao permission to speak without words, to scream without sound, to cry without explanation. In doing so, it reconnected him to something he hadn't realized he had lost, his own rhythm, the breakthrough. Months passed. Nao never spoke much, but his eyes changed, softer, steadier. One evening, after a long session with the drum, he approached Ensho and whispered, I was never angry at them. I was angry that no one heard me. Ensho nodded. And now? Nao looked up at the stars. Now I'm hearing myself. A final strike. Before leaving the monastery to return to the village, Now went to the drum one last time. This time, he didn't strike it hard. He simply placed his palm against its skin. No sound, just silence. But in that gesture was a whole life. He bowed and left. Evening reflection. The Buddha once said, "There is no sound louder than the heart that has not spoken." Tonight, before you sleep, ask yourself, what inside me has never been voiced? What emotion lives without language? Now, close your eyes. Imagine a drum. Feel it under your hand. You do not need to strike it hard. You do not need to make it loud, but let it echo. Let your breath carry the truth. Let your body speak its rhythm. You are not voiceless. You are simply waiting to be heard. Story 18. The Wind That Waited. Soundscape. Dry grass swaying in a field. A soft, breathless pause between breezes. Bamboo clinking. A single bird calling out, unanswered. There was a village where the seasons came late. Spring arrived like a visitor, unsure of their welcome. Flowers waited longer to bloom. Rain waited longer to fall. Even the wind held itself at the edge of the sky, as if asking permission to pass through. The villagers learned patience from the land. They planted, harvested later, never rushed. Life there did not follow the calendar, but the whisper of things not yet ready. In that village lived an elderly basket weaver named Yori. His hands moved slowly, not from age, but from deep attention. He believed that every reed had its own rhythm. He never began weaving until he had sat with the bundle long enough to know its mood. Some threads, he'd say, need time to soften. One summer, a young woman named May came to apprentice with him. She had grown up in the city, where time was currency and speed was success. She was brilliant, precise, and deeply tired. Her therapist had said, "Find something slow." She found Yori. On her first day, she asked to be taught immediately. Yori nodded, handed her a bundle of bamboo and said, "Wait until it tells you how to begin." May laughed. "Bamboo doesn't talk." Yori smiled. "Only to those who stop long, enough to listen." She sat. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Her fingers twitched. Her mind wandered. She began to fidget. "This is pointless," she muttered. Yori only added more tea to her cup. The waiting. Days turned into a week. Yori taught her nothing, or so she thought. He had her soak reeds in water and watch them bend. He had her walk through the forest and return only when she could describe what the wind felt like. He had her sweep the floor at dawn and write down 1 sentence a day. What is not ready today? She began to notice things. How morning light moves. How her shoulders relaxed after tea. How silence sometimes said more than advice. And yet, she still waited for a breakthrough, for mastery, for something to begin. Until one morning, the wind came. It swept through the valley like a long-held breath. The chimes sang. The grasses bowed. The trees moved as one. May stood outside the cottage and whispered, "It's time." Yori joined her, carrying a half-finished basket. "Now it begins," he said. Zen teaching. In Zen, the art of waiting is not passive. It is an active surrender, a trust in the unfolding of what cannot be forced. The flower does not bloom faster if you pull on the petals, says the teaching. The student does not awaken by rushing. The tea does not steep by demand. Zen teaches us to notice the space between moments, to live in the pause, the breath, the silence before speech. The wind does not ask when it may come. It arrives when it is ready. Buddhist wisdom. The Buddha once described virya, energy or effort, not as urgency, but as balanced persistence. A steadiness. He said, "Do not hurry, do not rest, let the path carry you." In the Satipatthana Sutta, mindfulness is described as continual, not frantic. The mind returns again and again, not to reach something faster, but to remain present with what is. To sit in the garden even when nothing is blooming. To walk the path even when you do not see the destination. Psychological insight. In modern psychology, the inability to tolerate waiting is called low distress. Tolerance. It leads to impulsivity, anxiety, and burnout. But studies show that learning to pause through meditation, slow breathing, nature immersion, rewires the brain to embrace uncertainty, to trust timing. This is not complacency. It is resilient patience. Yori taught May not with lessons, but with time, with the rhythm of reed and wind and tea. He taught her that growth is not always visible, that readiness cannot be rushed. The weaving. That afternoon, May touched the bamboo, and it felt different, alive, yielding. She dipped her fingers into the water, lifted the reeds, and began to weave. Not fast, not perfect, but present. The basket took 3 days. When it was done, Yori placed it in her lap and said, "This one is yours." She stared at it, not proud, but full, not accomplished, but connected. She asked, "What changed?" He said, "You stopped asking the bamboo to hurry." A return. May stayed for the summer. She wrote each morning. She no longer asked what she was supposed to become. She just wove. She later opened a studio called The Wind That Waits. No slogans, no promises, just a single line carved into the doorway. Begin. When it's time, stop when it's enough. Trust what's growing. Evening reflection. The Buddha once said, "Whatever is meant to be yours will come to you in its own time." Tonight, before sleep, ask yourself, where am I rushing? What part of me is not yet ready? And can I honor that? Now, close your eyes. Feel the breeze. Not as pressure, but as presence. Let what is not ready remain so. You are not behind. You are in rhythm. Let the wind wait, and when it comes, let it carry you. Story 19. The ladder left behind. Soundscape. Footsteps on gravel, growing fainter. Wind brushing treetops. A ladder creaks, then is gently laid down. A crow calls once, then silence. On the highest hill, overlooking 3 villages and 7 rice fields, there was a tiny hut built of stone and earth. Behind it stood a tall pine tree, and leaning against the tree, a ladder. It was old, wooden, worn smooth by weather and years. Travelers came from far and wide to climb it. They believed it led to something sacred. Enlightenment, vision, understanding. No signs explained it. No fence surrounded it. Just the ladder and the hut, waiting. The man who lived there was called Kosho. No one knew if it was his real name. It meant ancient pine. He had lived in the hut for decades, accepting no disciples, giving no lectures. But he welcomed everyone. When people arrived, they would bow. He would nod, then gesture toward the ladder. One day, a woman named Arya arrived. She was a lifelong seeker. She had studied all the sutras, traveled to India, meditated in forests and cities, And still, something inside her remained unsatisfied, like a question never fully asked. She had heard of the ladder in a dream. A friend had once whispered, "If you climb it, you will understand." Arya bowed before Kosho. He said nothing. She looked at the ladder. It leaned firmly against the tree, reaching only a few feet up, no more than a child could climb. She frowned. "This is it?" Kosho said. "Climb." The climb. Arya stepped up, one rung, then another. She reached the top within seconds. There was nothing above her. No doorway, no vision, just branches, leaves, sky. She stood there, confused. But where is the next part? Kosho remained below, watching with stillness. "I thought there would be more," she said. "Some higher view, some realization." "You're already there," he replied. The confusion. Arya came down, frustrated. "I've traveled thousands of miles," she said. "I've studied for decades. I've done everything I was supposed to. And now you're telling me, this is it?" Kosho nodded. "This is it." She laughed bitterly. "That can't be true." Kosho said nothing, but that night he placed a cup of tea beside her. On the rim, a single word carved in the glaze. Tadaima. "I'm home." Zen understanding. In Zen, the search for awakening often ends in the realization that nothing was missing to begin with. Before enlightenment, says the saying, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. We seek not because truth is far away, but because the ego demands complexity, a mountaintop, a light, a sign. But Zen whispers, what if this breath is the answer? What if here is the destination? The ladder was never meant to lift. It was meant to stop the search. Buddhist wisdom. The Buddha taught that awakening is not acquisition. It is the end of craving. In the Diamond Sutra, he says, there is no path to the Buddha. The Buddha is the path. You do not climb to become. You return to what already is. The ladder is illusion. The moment is truth, psychological insight. In therapeutic work, seekers often suffer from what's called destination, addiction, the belief that happiness lies one achievement away, one more book, one more retreat, one more self-improvement goal. But studies show lasting peace doesn't come from arrival, it comes from presence, from unlearning the lie that I'm not there yet. The nervous system softens not when it reaches something new, but when it recognizes, I'm already safe, I'm already enough. Kosho's ladder was a mirror, a koan in wood, a question that unraveled itself. The unfolding. Arya stayed for several days. She sat beneath the tree, watched ants move through moss, drank tea with no intent, and slowly she noticed something new, not in the world but in herself. She no longer felt like a seeker, she felt like a witness. Before leaving, she asked Kosho, why the ladder? He finally smiled. To give you the illusion of distance, before handing you the truth of nearness. A return. She never climbed another sacred stair again. She no longer chased. She cooked slowly. She listened deeply. She said less, but meant more. And in the quiet of one evening, while brushing her hair beside the open window, she whispered to no one in particular, I'm home. Evening reflection. The Buddha once said, there is no path to happiness. Happiness is the path. Tonight, before you sleep, ask yourself, what ladder am I still trying to climb? Where am I postponing peace? Now, close your eyes, step down, sit, breathe. There is no higher place to reach. Only this moment, only this breath. You are not on the way, you have already arrived. Story 20. The Silence After the Storm. Soundscape, distant thunder rolling away, rain softening into mist, leaves dripping rhythmically. Then, stillness, the kind that fills the world after everything has been shaken. There was a lake deep within a forest that only the locals knew. No paths led there, just impressions left by deer and monks who knew the way by feel. The water was glass. Not always, but often, especially after the storms. People said it was a sacred place, though no temple stood nearby. Some came to pray, some came to forget, most came simply to sit. It was known as Fukinsei no Mizu, the water of imperfection, not for its clarity, but because of how it always returned to stillness, no matter how violently it had been stirred. One summer, a man named Daichi came. He was a carpenter by trade, but his hands had stopped working, not physically, but instinctively. His client said his work lacked soul. His partner had said he was absent, though he never left the house. He didn't understand what was wrong. All he knew was that he no longer felt safe, anywhere. Even in silence, his heart raced. Even in comfort, his chest tightened. A friend, a therapist who had once trained with monks, told him, "You're not broken, you're overwhelmed. Go sit beside the water that remembers how to calm." The arrival. Daichi wandered for 2 days before he found it. The lake was still. So still, it made him nervous. He sat on a rock and listened. Not to anything specific, just the absence of urgency, the soft lap of water, the breeze that moved without needing to be seen. He stayed for hours, and still, he felt no better. That night, he dreamt of waves, crashing, breaking, endless. He woke with his fists clenched. "I can't relax," he muttered. Even here. A monk had once told him, "Stillness isn't something you find. It's something that finds you, once you stop chasing it." The nervous system. In trauma healing, there's a concept called dysregulation, when the nervous system becomes stuck in a loop of fear, hypervigilance, or collapse. This doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It means your body is still bracing for a storm that has already passed. Daichi's storm was not the loud kind. It was made of years of quiet pressure, expectations, deadlines, emotional restraint, smiling when hurting, producing when tired. His body was wise. It never forgot. But now, it didn't know how to stop bracing. Zen and restoration. In Zen, the body is not separate from the path. Zazen, sitting meditation, is not just for the mind. It's for the heart, the spine, the lungs. Stillness isn't silence, it's regulation. Breath by breath. The lake did not teach by speaking. It taught by reflecting. See how the storm passed? You will too. Give yourself time. The return to calm. Daichi stayed at the lake for 3 weeks. He did not try to meditate. He did not force rest. He just let his body do what it needed. Some days, he lay on the moss and slept for hours. Some nights, he walked the perimeter of the lake again and again. He cried, though not from pain, just the slow exhale of everything he hadn't known he was carrying. The water never rushed him, and slowly, it mirrored something back. A nervous system learning to trust again. Buddhist teaching. The Buddha often compared the mind to water. He said, "When water is agitated, it is difficult to see. When it settles, clarity appears." But he never said to force that stillness. He taught sati, mindfulness not as control, but as companionship. Sit with the agitation, watch the ripples, be there long enough, and the stillness will return on its own. Healing is not about forcing calm. It's about staying close enough for calm to remember you. The last day. On his final morning, Daichi sat as he always did. The sky was soft, no wind. The lake reflected his image, and for the first time, he saw not a man broken, but a man resting. He placed his hand on his chest. It no longer raced, not because the world had changed, but because he had stopped fighting his own storm. He returned home. His hands remembered how to shape wood again. Not urgently, not perfectly, just honestly. And every time he touched cedar or pine, he imagined water and waited for it to become still. It always did. Evening reflection. The Buddha once said, "Peace is not found by avoiding the storm. Peace is found in knowing the storm will pass." Tonight, before you sleep, ask yourself, am I bracing for something that has already passed? Close your eyes. Place one hand on your chest, one on your belly. Breathe. Let your nervous system know, we are safe now. Let the ripples settle. Let the silence come. You do not have to force it. Stillness remembers its way back to you. Story 21. The bowl without a bottom. Soundscape. The soft clink of ceramic. A breeze slipping under wooden shutters. Water dripping slowly, forever, into a basin that never fills. In the heart of a temple, nestled between cedar trees and stone, lanterns, there sat an object of quiet mystery. A bowl, perfectly round, smooth as river rock. But if you looked closely, you'd notice it had no bottom. Crafted centuries ago by an unknown monk potter, it was placed at the center of the meditation hall. No signs, no inscriptions, just the bowl resting on a small pedestal of pine. It was called Kanryo Nakihachi, the bowl without completion. And yet, every morning, a novice monk named Ren would kneel and pour water into it, again and again. Ren was young, full of questions, full of effort. He wanted to get it right. Meditation, posture, chants, enlightenment. He kept a journal titled Steps to Stillness. Each day, he poured the water and watched it flow through the bottom, disappearing onto the small bed of stones beneath. He hated it. "This is a waste," he muttered one morning. "It goes nowhere." An older monk, Seiji, heard him and chuckled. That's the point. The frustration. Ren confronted Seiji that evening. "I don't understand. Why fill something that doesn't hold?" Seiji handed him a ladle. "Tomorrow, fill it with attention, not expectation." Ren frowned. "That doesn't answer the question." Seiji smiled. "Because you're asking the wrong one." Zen paradox. In Zen, completion is a myth. There is no final understanding, no last breath of clarity, no finished self. "The path is not a ladder," said a Zen master. It is a circle walked slowly. The bowl, without a bottom, exists to exhaust the need for arrival. It asks, can you give without grasping? Can you pour effort without needing outcome? This is the heart of Zen. Buddhist insight. The Buddha taught of anicca, impermanence. Everything arises and passes. Thoughts, feelings, lives, identities, even spiritual growth. He also warned against upadana, clinging, especially clinging to achievement, to the illusion that there's a point when we'll be done. He said, "No, task brings completion. Only presence brings peace." The bowl teaches this not by theory, but by invitation to futility. a sacred, soft futility that breaks the ego and opens the heart. Psychological reflection. In therapy, there is a phenomenon known as chronic striving. People who are driven by the idea that if they just improve enough, achieve enough, fix themselves enough, they will finally rest. But the truth, there is no enough that silences shame. Only acceptance does that. Practices that involve repetition without result, gardening, sweeping, prayer beads, walking, can help regulate the nervous system and dissolve perfectionism. The bowl, with its unfillable emptiness, is not a flaw. It is a mirror. The breakthrough. Weeks passed. Ren still poured the water. One morning, he paused before pouring. He looked at the bowl. He exhaled, softly, deeply. No frustration this time. He poured and smiled. Because for the first time, he wasn't trying to fill anything. He was simply being there. Later, Seiji asked, "Did you find your answer?" Ren nodded. It was never about the bowl. Seiji grinned. "You're starting to understand the question." A return to life. Ren kept journaling, but now, instead of writing goals or insights, he wrote, "Today I bowed. Today I breathed. Today I poured." Years later, when he became a teacher himself, he kept a small replica of the bowl in his home. Whenever a student asked, "How will I know when I'm healed?" he would hand them the ladle and say, "Let's practice, not finishing." Evening reflection. The Buddha once said, "You only lose what you are trying to hold." Tonight, before sleep, ask yourself, what am I trying to complete? What part of me is still waiting to be enough? Now, imagine a bowl. See yourself pouring water into it, not to fill, but to feel. Each drop, a moment, each breath, a letting go. You do not need to be complete. You only need to be here. Sleep in the soft peace of what remains unfinished. Story 22. The door that closed itself. Soundscape. A door creaking shut. Autumn wind moving through tall grass. A rustle of robes. A final step. Then the faint click of a latch, followed by quiet. In an abandoned temple on the edge of a forest, there was a door known simply as the one that closed itself. No hinges creaked, no hands touched it, but when the moment was right, when a person had stayed long enough to hear what they needed to hear, or let go of what they couldn't carry anymore, the door would close, softly, quietly, without drama. And that's how they knew it was time to leave. Few knew the temple's name, fewer knew its location. But stories found their way to those who needed them, often during endings. Divorce, retirement, death, betrayal. People didn't come for answers. They came to stand in the hall and wait. One evening, just as the leaves began to fall, a woman named Lian arrived. She was a former opera singer, once known across cities for her voice, clear, soaring, unmistakable. But an illness had taken her vocal cords, not all at once, slowly, note by note. She had tried speech therapy, retreats, even silence. Nothing brought her voice back. She came to the temple not for healing, but because someone had whispered, "When you're ready to stop hoping, go to the door that closes itself." The waiting. Lian stayed for 7 days. She swept the floors, lit incense, walked the gardens where wild mint and moss grew together without asking for permission. She didn't speak, not because she couldn't, but because she didn't want to hear the silence of her own voice. She wanted to stay forever. But the door remained open. On the 8th day, she approached the altar and sang, not out loud, but in her memory. She sang every aria she had ever loved, every note she had once mastered. Then she whispered to no one, "I miss who I was." Her shoulders trembled, but I cannot keep her alive. And in that whisper, so soft, it barely moved the air, the door behind her closed. The lesson of the closing. In Zen, doors are not merely boundaries, they are teachers. When one door closes, says the world, another opens. But Zen responds, what if the closing is the opening? To surrender is not to give up. It is to let go of the hand that keeps knocking, to stop insisting the old life return. To bow, not to the ending, but to what begins once the ending is honored. Buddhist wisdom. The Buddha taught dukkha, the suffering that arises from craving for what was, clinging to what is no longer possible. He said, if you let go a little, you'll have a little peace. If you let go a lot, you'll have a lot of peace. If you let go completely, you'll be free. The door that closes itself is the heart that stops begging. Psychological insight. In grief work, there's a stage known as acceptance, often misunderstood as peace or approval. But true acceptance is raw. It's the moment you say, I don't like this. I didn't choose it, but I cannot fight it anymore. This surrender allows integration. It turns loss into space, and in that space, something new quietly begins. Lian's voice did not return, but her need to be who she was faded. And in that emptiness, she felt her first real breath in years. The walk down. Lian left the temple the next morning. No song accompanied her. No fanfare followed. She walked slowly down the path. She paused at the final bend in the forest, turned to look one last time, and did not wish to go back. She opened a tea house in her village. No one knew she had once sung for thousands. She became known for her listening, for the way she held space, for the way she brewed each cup like a poem. When people came with sorrow, she simply sat with them, until their own door softly closed. Evening reflection. The Buddha once said, let go of what has gone. Let go of what is not yet. Look deeply at what is now. Tonight, before sleep, ask yourself, what door in me is waiting to close? What life am I still holding on to out of fear? Now, breathe. Imagine a door. You don't have to shut it. Just stop holding it open. If it is time, it will close gently, without pain, without noise. And when it does, trust that a new room begins, not with sound, but with silence. Story 23. The candle that didn't burn. Soundscape. A cold, windless room. The soft strike of a match. Silence. Then, no flame. Just breath. Just waiting. In a stone chamber within a monastery far to the north, where winters came early and stars stayed longer in the sky, there was a ritual held once a month. At dusk, the monks would gather in the hall of quiet flame. Each monk was given a candle, a match, and a single instruction. Light your candle, if the flame is willing. If it didn't light, they were told not to try again, not to force it, not to be ashamed, just to sit with it. And so they did. Some candles flared easily, golden and warm. Others stayed dark, the wick untouched. But no one looked at another with pity or praise, because in this monastery it was understood, the light is never forced, it is welcomed. One winter, a man named Jun arrived. He was not a monk, but a physician who had taken leave from his clinic after burnout pulled his world down from within. He had helped many, saved lives, carried families through grief. But somewhere, along the way, he'd lost his own center, like a lantern so focused on lighting others. It forgot it too, needed tending. He came seeking silence, and a way back to the part of himself that didn't need to do in order to be. The first ritual. On his first night, Jun entered the hall of quiet flame. He was handed a simple white candle and a single wooden match. He knelt, waited, watched the others. Then he struck his match, cupped it from the breeze, held it to the wick. Nothing. He tried, again, then remembered the rule. Only one try. He stared at the unlit candle, feeling foolish, exposed. He wanted to apologize, to explain, but no one looked at him, not out of indifference, but out of respect. So he sat in the dim hall, surrounded by soft flickers and his own shadow. The lesson begins. After the ritual, he approached an elder monk. I failed. The monk raised an eyebrow. Did the candle break? No. Did you throw it? No. Then where is the failure? Jun hesitated. It didn't light. The monk nodded. Neither does the moon, and yet it shines. Zen teaching. In Zen, non-doing is a sacred act. There is a time to act, and a time to allow, to rest, to observe, to trust that growth and healing do not respond to force. The water does not bloom the lotus, it simply surrounds it. The candle does not owe you its flame. It offers it when it is ready. Buddhist wisdom. The Buddha once taught the importance of right effort. Not overexertion, not passivity, but balanced intention. He said, just as a lute string too tight will snap and too loose will not sound, so too must effort be gentle, healing, clarity, creativity. They do not arise under pressure. They arise in space, in warmth, in welcome. Psychological reflection. Modern neuroscience confirms this. The parasympathetic nervous system, the one responsible for rest, digestion, and creativity, only activates in safety. When we push, demand, rush, or expect, our body registers threat. But when we allow, pause, and accept not now as a valid state, we signal to ourselves, it's okay to be where I am. Jun's unlit candle was not failure. It was an invitation to stop demanding light, the quiet unfolding. In the following weeks, Jun attended the ritual again and again. Sometimes his candle lit, sometimes it didn't, but he no longer saw it as a test. He began to see the unlit candle as its own form of practice, a practice of presence, a practice of enoughness, a practice of being with. One night, his candle lit easily. He smiled, but not because of the flame, because he no longer needed it to light in order to feel whole. Returning, Jun eventually returned to his clinic. He worked fewer hours. He listened more slowly. He kept a candle on his desk, not to light, but to remember. Whenever he felt urgency rise, he would place his hand on it and breathe. If the light is willing, he'd whisper, and sometimes that was enough. Evening reflection. The Buddha once said, peace comes not from the flame, but from the stillness that watches it. Tonight, before sleep, ask yourself, where am I forcing the light? What part of me feels unlit, and is that okay? Now, imagine a candle. Strike a Match in your mind. If it lights, be grateful. If it doesn't, sit anyway. You are not the flame. You are the space that welcomes it. And that space is already light. Story 24. The wall that wasn't there. Soundscape, light wind against dry grass, the slow hush of bare feet walking. Then, a soft thump, the sound of stopping short, though nothing blocks the way. In the open plains beyond the last cluster of trees, where the sky stretches wide enough to hush your thoughts, there stood an invisible wall, not a physical one. There were no bricks, no wood, no fence, but nearly everyone who walked the path stopped at the same spot. Some turned back, others sat down and stared into the distance. A few reached forward, touched nothing, and walked away in silence, shaking their heads. Only a rare few kept walking. An old Zen teacher named Togen lived in a hut beyond that place. Those who made it to his door were offered rice, tea, and a small slate with 3 words carved into it. The wall isn't. He never explained. One day, a traveller arrived, a young sculptor named Mika. She had come seeking a teacher who could unlock her creative paralysis. For years she had created stone, wood, clay, but suddenly, without reason, she had stopped. No new work came. The tools felt heavy. Every unfinished piece seemed to mock her. A friend had told her, "It's not your skill, it's your wall." She had laughed then, but now, she wasn't laughing. The encounter. Mika walked the long path, her feet aching, her chest tight. Then, without warning, she stopped. She didn't know why. There was no obstacle before her, but she could not move. It felt like something pressed back, not against her body, but her will. She stood there for hours, frustrated, confused, afraid, until finally she turned back. But before she walked far, she heard a voice, soft, aged. "You found the wall." Togen stood behind her, barefoot, holding a lantern. She blinked. "There's nothing there." He nodded. "Exactly. The illusion of the wall. In Zen, the walls that bind us most tightly are not external, they are internal. Stories, identities, fears. I'm not ready. It's too late. I need permission. I might fail. These thoughts form the bricks, time and repetition, mortar them in. Eventually, we don't need a real barrier. We build one in the mind. And like Mika, we stop. Not because we're blocked, but because we believe we are. Buddhist wisdom. The Buddha often spoke of mental formations, sankhara, as the lens through which we view life. They shape not what is, but what we believe is possible. He taught, "The mind is everything. What you think, you become." But he also said, "No one outside you is holding you back. To walk past the wall is not to destroy it. It is to realize it was never real." Psychological insight. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, defines limiting beliefs as thoughts we accept as truths without evidence. They become self-fulfilling, guiding decisions, behaviors, even posture. Neurologically, the brain avoids discomfort, so it builds these beliefs as protection. But what protects you in one moment can trap you in the next. Like Mika, many creatives, professionals or dreamers hit invisible limits, not due to lack of talent or opportunity, but due to internalized ceilings. Therapy, mindfulness, and deep self-inquiry help us see the wall. And then choose to walk anyway, the walk beyond. Togen led Mika back to the invisible line. He stood beside her. "You can stay here forever," he said, "and still be loved." She nodded. But if you take one more step, he added, you may discover you were never stuck. She closed her eyes. Her breath trembled. Then she stepped. There was no resistance, just grass, air, openness, and something inside her began to cry, not from fear, but from the relief of freedom. After, Mika stayed at Togan's hut for a week. She didn't sculpt, she didn't plan. She watched the sky and made tea and spoke very little. But when she returned home, she touched her tools differently, not with pressure, with presence. Her first piece was called No Wall. It was simply a door, evening reflection. The Buddha once said, you are your own master. You make your future. Tonight, before sleep, ask yourself, what invisible wall am I still obeying? What story says, you can't? And can I whisper back? Maybe I can. Now, close your eyes. See the wall. Name it gently. Then, step. Even 1 inch, because beyond it, nothing is waiting to stop you. Only your life. And it's ready. Story 25. The moon that watched without judgment. Soundscape, night insects. A slow wind through tall grass. The distant hoot of an owl, and above it all, silence steeped in moonlight. There is a legend in the southern hills of Kyoto, near a grove where no paths are marked and no lanterns burn after dusk. They say that when the moon is full and the world has grown quiet enough, if you sit beside the central stone of the clearing and look upward, you will feel seen. Not watched, not judged, but witnessed. As you are. For centuries, pilgrims came there not to chant, not to seek vision, not even to pray. They came to lay down their sorrow, their shame, their self-hatred, the bruises the world never saw, the parts of themselves they believed unworthy of light. And they sat beneath the moon, not for answers, but for companionship. One autumn, a woman named Hannah arrived. She wore no robes, carried no offerings. She came in ordinary clothes, hands tucked into her sleeves, eyes cast downward. She had not come from afar. She lived nearby, in a village where she ran a small clinic, known for her calm. But inside her, a secret brewed for decades. She could soothe others, listen deeply, but, to herself, she had been cruel. Her past was one she spoke of only to herself, and even then, with judgment, the mistakes, the betrayals, the people she couldn't save, the self she couldn't forgive. She was exhausted, not from work, but from being two people. The sitting. Hannah found the stone. The moon had already begun to rise, soft, golden, full. She sat, no ceremony, just breath. She waited for some release, some cleansing, but what came was memory. A moment from years ago, her slapping her own cheek in the mirror saying, "Why are you like this?" Another, ignoring a friend's call during their grief, too numb to respond. Another, abandoning a painting she'd loved because she thought it wasn't good enough. And then her voice over and over, "You should have done better. You're not enough. You don't deserve peace." She began to cry, but it wasn't just grief, it was anger. She looked up at the moon, defiant. "Do you see me?" she asked aloud. "Even like this?" The moon did not reply. It simply remained. Still, present, unmoving. The moon and Zen. In Zen, the moon is often a symbol of the ever-present, non-judging awareness. It reflects light, never choosing what it shines upon. It does not flinch at blood. It does not flee from ugliness. It simply sees. The finger points to the moon, goes the Zen koan, but the fool looks only at the finger. What it means is, don't get caught in the methods. See what they're pointing toward. Compassion, wholeness, the quiet presence that exists beneath all your masks. The moon does not ask you to be different. It only asks you to be true. Buddhist wisdom. The Buddha spoke of karuna, compassion, not as an emotion, but as a stance of the heart. As a mother protects her child, even at the risk of her own life, let your heart hold all beings in compassion, even yourself. And yet, we often offer this compassion to others far more easily than to the mirror. Hannah, like so many, was kind to everyone, except the one who needed her most. Psychological insight. Self-judgment activates the same neural circuitry as physical pain. Studies show that shame, especially chronic self-directed shame, can lead to depression, anxiety, and disconnection from the body. But self-compassion, practiced even in small moments, shifts the brain from threat to safety, from critique to care. Dr. Kristin Neff, a pioneer in this field, teaches that self-compassion consists of 3 parts. Mindfulness, noticing the pain without exaggeration or denial. Common humanity, remembering we all struggle, all fall short. Kindness, speaking to ourselves the way we would to a child or a dear friend. The moon offers all 3, silently, fully, without asking us to change first. The breath of return. Hannah placed her palm on her heart. She whispered, "Even this?" A wind moved through the grove. The leaves did not answer, but they did not deny her either. And so she did something she hadn't done in years. She forgave herself, not because she'd earned it, but because withholding it no longer made sense. The quiet afterward. Hannah began returning to the grove every full moon. Sometimes she brought others. She never led rituals. She just sat. In time, the villagers began to call her Tsukinote, the moon's hand, not because she gave light, but because she knew how to hold darkness. In her clinic, she began a new practice. She placed a small bowl by the window. At dusk, she would place a single note inside. Something unspoken, guilt, regret, hope, truth, and she would whisper, "Seen." Evening reflection. The Buddha once said, "You yourself, as much as anyone in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection." Tonight, before sleep, ask yourself, what part of me have I refused to see with kindness? Now, picture the moon, let it shine on every part of you, especially the parts in shadow. Let it witness what you've hidden. Let it love what you've judged. Say to yourself, even this, even this. Still, I am whole. Sleep under that light. You do not need to be better to be beloved. You already are. You've walked through mountains of silence, past invisible walls and echoing drums, through rain-soaked gardens and lantern-lit paths. You've sat with grief, with joy, with questions too tender to name, and you did not turn away. You listened. You breathed. You stayed. That is healing. If even one story whispered truth to something hidden in you, if even one moment reminded you that you are not broken, but becoming, then this journey has found its purpose. The light you carry now is not mine. It is yours. It always was. If these stories moved you, please let them move through others. Leave a comment. Tell me what lingered in your heart. Share this video with someone you love. Subscribe to the channel to receive more quiet truths in a noisy world. And if you feel called, leave a review so others may find their way here. Until we meet again, keep walking slowly, keep breathing gently, keep listening inward. The journey doesn't end here. It just becomes your own.